Welcome to the Two Beasts podcast, where best friends Chris and Ollie try and figure out this complicated thing we call life.
On this special episode of the Two Beasts podcast, we're super excited to introduce you to Ged Mac. Ged is the CEO and founder of the Climbing Hangar, a multi-million pound indoor climbing company with centres all across the UK. In this episode, we're going to talk about how he started his business journey, the simple mistake that cost him over £100,000, and how to balance professionalism without compromising who you truly are. We hope you enjoy. Let's get into it.
Welcome back.
We're back.
Welcome back to the Two Beasts podcast. Got a slightly different setup today. No wide shot because we've got to be creative with things. But we're here today with Ged. How's it going, sir?
It's excellent. Thanks very much.
Thank you for having us here in your beautiful home, and thank you for agreeing to come on the podcast. Really appreciate it. Why don't you, like I said to you just before we started, we've done your little intro, but there's a good chance, we messed it up. So why don't you do it on your own account so you can be in charge of your own
So this
destiny.
is like the fact check bit.
Yeah, fact check bit, 100%.
Actually, this person.
Yeah.
Is it completely off to what we've actually just written?
Okay, well, I'm a milkman. Is my Right, intro. So I guess the thing I'm known for currently would be I'm Ged McDonald, so I have an unpronounceable surname. It's MacDonald in Gaelic. In fact, Ged is also my nickname. Garrod is my real name, but that's also Gaelic. Equally unpronounceable. So and I'm the CEO and the founder of the Climbing Hangar. So that's kind of what I'm known for.
Yeah, and the Climbing Hangar is one of the biggest, or if not the biggest, climbing centres in the UK?
I think we are the second biggest in terms of the number of sites. So I think our leader is Lake Climbing Centre. They have 11 and we have 8 and we're building number 9.
Cool. Yeah. You've been rapidly expanding too, huh?
Yeah, I mean, before 2018, it was basically just parties and climbing. I mean, I didn't even look in the bank account. I had no idea what I was doing. And that is simply not an exaggeration. No, it wasn't like this. It was more like this. We've got no idea what we're doing. Yeah, and if stuff got a bit stressy, we'd put on a stupid party or event or have a fancy dress day.
Yeah. Just to see what happens more than anything else,
Just as a bit of a stress buster. Yeah.
So how did the Climbing Hangar begin? Like, where did you start with it, and what made you start a business in building climbing centres?
If I can give you a more detailed answer, I suppose, because I think what's interesting is what is the start of a story, right? Because you're choosing a point in time, aren't you, right? So when did I actually start it? I opened the doors, January the 8th, 2011. When did we start to think about it? About 18 months before that. But in terms of where is the beginning of the story, really, in terms of where do I feel the beginning is for me, it's probably discovering climbing, really. Well, actually, climbing and rave culture, probably the two things that made the biggest impact on my whole life. And both of them were subcultures at the time. So I started climbing in 1998 with an outdoor centre. But then when I went to Undercover Rock in Bristol, that was probably 1999, 2000. And climbing was still very purist, if you like. It was climbing for climbers, by climbers. And when I started Bristol, the dance music scene and the climbing scene seemed to be the same thing, or the circles were so heavily overlapping. Most of the people that worked there were either DJs, go climbing, and then go out for the night, go climbing. And I grew up in a very working class family. So, an ordinary career progression was how my life was sort of laid out in my head. And then I found people my parents' age who didn't really work, but had cash because they had their own business or they'd done stuff, and all of a sudden things were really, really different, and my horizons went. So in that respect, so much of the Climbing Hangar's story is built into those early experiences of basically seeing the world through totally different eyes, and especially the rave scene, because I'm not the manliest of mans would be the best way to describe me. So when we used to go out as lads, and you go out and just get smashed and try and pull a girl, right? I hated it.
Yeah.
I hated it in my whole being, going to those clubs, and I was just why is the music so loud? Yeah. This is a talking bar and I can't hear anyone, right? And it'd drive me insane. But I didn't like the fact that I felt like I was on the savannah and I might get beaten up or I might pull someone. Like, and that just didn't seem like two I was like, yeah, that was a bit 50-50 for my, but it's never 50-50. Beating up was more likely than getting a good lady. So, like, and then I went clubbing, and the first place I went clubbing was called the Black Swan in Bristol, right? And it was roughneck, was the best way to describe it. I thought I was probably going to get murdered on the way in.
Bristol's chaotic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like worse than London, for sure.
It's incredible, right? And I was like, oh my God, we're all going to die, right? And then we went in and we went through this back door and we're in this place that was suddenly decked out with all kinds of psychedelia. There was like a chill out area, and like I bumped into someone and they apologized to me, which if you've been clubbing, like is the classic experience, right? So I suddenly found this place where the sound system was good, no tinnitus, I could hear people, but the music was loud. I didn't really get dance music at the time, but that wasn't important at the time because basically people were nice to you. They talked to you at the bar, and I was just like, what? You know, and that sensation of like all of the things that I thought were normal aren't, and my life doesn't have to be that way. So for me, the hangar story starts there, really, in club and climbing, especially Bristol climbing. Yeah,
so you had this, it sounds like you had this very kind of standard career trajectory ahead of you, or at least that's the kind of world you've been raised in.
Yeah.
But in your spare time, you like doing raving and climbing, and you found raving as the one part of the community. When you're clubbing at that age, you know, you're going out clubbing at that age. We're the same, by the way. We've always said that we don't actually like clubbing all that much. Like, it's just not our thing.
It's just what you do, isn't it?
And then another one of our podcast guests said, well, I reckon you've probably just been to the wrong clubs. I reckon you do like it. And that sounds like exactly what happened to you.
100%.
You actually found a community of people like, oh, hold on a minute. Now I see what the fuss is all about. And within that community, you found people that were more entrepreneurial, and that kind of expanded your horizons outside of the career trajectory.
Well, different ways of thinking, which I suppose is more entrepreneurial, right? As in, you're not, if you see the same as everybody else, you're never going to innovate, right? Because you're basically drinking from the same well, right? But I think the other thing that was really interesting about the rave scene was late 90s, early 2000s, like the British government was on a warpath with dance music. Because of course people dancing, especially in some woods, right, very, very dangerous, right? We wouldn't want to be focusing on, say, like murder or sexual assault. People dancing in the woods is really where we need to be putting police resources, right? So that's sarcasm. In case there's any American listeners.
Anyone sort of forgot the tone there.
So there's police officers right now going,
well, he doesn't mean that.
Hold on a minute.
So in that sense, you basically had this community that had been demonized, and then I walked into the space and I was like, everyone's being nice. Like that sudden sense of what I've seen on the news is a lie. Like, I mean, it's not true, which I've experienced before because I'm Northern Irish, so I'm from just outside of Belfast. And when I came to England, even when I was 5, I knew that the news was different. So I knew that truth had much more subjectivity to it, if you like, than we would imagine. So I never trusted the news from the age of 5. And then, so that was this like adult recognition of, oh my God, like the lies are still ongoing, right? This is politics. This isn't truth. This isn't justice. And then like seeing a community that I've been told was bad, suddenly realizing there were probably some of the nicest people I'd ever spent an evening with. And I was like, right.
Why do you think they tried to demonize that culture?
Well, I mean, there are obviously problems with drugs, right? So, I mean, it's not like that's like something that's cool for everyone, but also the choice to make them criminal, or even if they're decriminalized, there's still problems with it. Like people get hurt, right? So it's not a regulated space, but also all subcultures have been demonized by the mainstream. It used to be illegal to be gay, right? You know, so, you know, so you think about that, even being yourself has been illegal. They're not doing anything wrong. They're just like being themselves as they were born. That was illegal, right? So if you've seen Valley Uprising, you know, you saw how the Americans, you know, in their drive for economic growth, the people, just the hippies at Camp 4, they're a problem. Gypsies are a problem. Anyone that's not participating in the system represents a threat to the social order. And I think that, so like in Italy at the moment, the new fascist government there is taking a new warpath out on dance music. And again, because they just represent a threat to conservatism, if you like, which is this is the family. This is the appropriate way to be a person and to celebrate. And I think it's a threat, and I think it makes people nervous.
Do you feel like there was a crossover between that and climbing? Because I feel like climbing's been that sort of like subculture, and that especially in the 80s and 90s and into the early 2000s, it was that kind of like, wow, they're a bit sort of hippie and a bit out there and a bit different, and then they were,
Oh, they are weird, don't they, climbers?
They are very weird. Yeah.
I don't know who sort of. I've read about them. And it says that they're weird.
There might be a couple of people in this room.
Climber too much time. They're dodgy. They are.
Yeah. But do you feel like that they sort of, with that whole like jumping on a stereotype and trying to suppress it, do you feel like climbing's similar in that way?
Yeah, I think climbing was probably ever so slightly more insulated because it had sort of the outdoor activities element to it. But then if you think how long will we sort of like tarred under the adrenaline junkies sort of thing, and obviously that's just being irresponsible, isn't it? Like in the same way that going clubbing is irresponsible because you might be that person or so on. So I think anything that isn't safe and mainstream naturally gets a fiercely critical lens, and I suppose to some extent now I've got a little one, I'm starting to get a bit of that. I understand it. Like one of my mates, his daughter started trad climbing. She's trad climbing pretty well, and he was like, yeah, I'm shitting myself, which is like, he goes, what happens if she gets really good?
Like
we're gonna, because then she's gonna climb hard stuff with no gear in it, and you think, do I want my kids to do that? And I sort of do, but I sort of don't. And I'm like, oh, God.
What do I do? It's like hard complex.
I mean, all of a sudden, that transition into dadland, and you're like, okay, I get being risk averse a bit more. I could roughly see where my mum was coming from now.
A little bit.
Although she actually should have bought me a rope when I asked for one, but she said, I'm not buying you one because if you fall off using it, it'll be my fault. And I'm like, well, if I fall off without one, because I can't afford one, right? Think about it.
To be fair, I mean, I'm a childless man. I'm a young man, but I can understand if I even just think about stuff I've done, and I imagine a child of mine doing it, that shits me up a little.
Yeah,
it's worrying. It's definitely worrying.
I think that actually makes us sensible.
Yeah.
But here we are, not dead. And like happy people with like good friendship groups, like, and really enriching and fulfilling things that we do in our spare time. So it's a trade-off, isn't it, to some extent?
Well, there's the story that you're probably aware of, as you're a learned man. Is the overbearing mother story, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where you have to a certain degree. It's weird because you're kind of bringing a child into the world knowing that it's going to be like chaos and there's going to be misery involved. But equally, they have to go through that stuff. And if you coddle them, it's going to turn into a disaster for them. And then they're just going to be so weak that as soon as you pop your clogs, which is going to happen, by the way, we're all going to die. Surprise, surprise. Then they're buggered. Yeah.
So, and I think it's totally true. I mean, my parents, so I've grown up in a mixed race family. So my mum is Northern Irish, my stepdad is Jamaican. So the violence that my mum was familiar with growing up, like I can understand why she's risk averse, right? So Northern Ireland in her lifetime was not a great place. So, and then like every Northern Irish family, the immediate stories of violence, and threat, and just, it's part of everyone's context, right? So the reason she left for England as, a very young single mum was to get away from that. I remember her saying, when I asked her, why are we leaving? She's like, well, I want you to grow up somewhere where you can have friends because you like them, like rather than anything else. And then my dad, or stepdad, but I'll call him dad because he's been there the whole time, he grew up as a black man in the West Midlands, in the same period of time, when the pubs did say no blacks, dogs or Irish on the door. So he's teetotal and he's been falsely breathalyzed more times than I can count. He's been the only person that's been like stopped and searched in an airport, right, when nobody else had been, because it was Inverness Airport, so it was very small, right? So their familiarity with like risk, structural violence and state forms of oppression and prejudice are pretty real, so I can see why they wanted to pad me in cotton wool a little bit, because for exactly that, they were like, this world is chaos and unpleasant and unkind.
Yeah, but now you're a climber and you run a massive business and everything can go to shit if you let your ball slip for 1 second. So I guess that is what it is, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, that's it. But that's what happens anyway. Like it doesn't matter. I nearly died in Italy not so long ago, like abseiling off a rope in the dark, really, really quite far away from the floor. First time ever, I think anyway, not tied a knot on the end of a rope. And, and it came through the device and I was just holding onto the rope, like looking at a few centimetres of tail sticking out. Let's look at the flashbacks,
What was going through your head when that happened?
At that point in time, I was just like, like silence. And then I looked at the little tail and I was like, well, don't fuck around, right? Grab it with both hands.
Don't just hang there.
Right, and then it was just like go at the rope, go and find somewhere safe, and I found a bolt and clipped into that, and so on.
Your brain just kind of goes into that survival instinct then, isn't it? It's like, right, let's just sort of slow down.
Yeah.
Logical now.
Yeah.
Don't do anything stupid.
So I'm just going to live with that feeling that I might vomit suddenly for the rest of my life instead. So I saved it all up, right, for later.
An abseiling story I got was, it was kind of silly. We went to this place in Wales, I forget where exactly now, but there was like different heights of rock. There's like a really famous place in Merthyr Tydfil. And we had enough rope for like this side, but then there was like this big cliff here that was just not really for abseiling, but we just did it anyway. There was a bag like caught on it, like halfway down. And I said, boys, I want that bag. Like, I reckon there's like 8 of us here. I can abseil down to it, grab the bag, and then I either climb up, or if I can't climb up, 7 of you can pull me up, surely.
Surely.
No.
This was not how it worked out.
So I get, first of all, I'm like a meter away from this bag, and I'm like, a little bit more, and they're like, mate, we're out of rope. And I'm like, fuck, man, that sucks. I want this bag. And then suddenly, bang, I'm falling. Just something drops and I'm plummeting. And the bag just goes, whoosh, and I'm like, this is it. Dead. I'm out of rope. And now for whatever reason, I'm plummeting towards the earth. There's at least like 100 foot below me, whatever it is, like 50 foot. Like, I'm done. Like, game over. And then I stop. And I'm like, right. I'm not dead. It was a prank. Bro. They told me they were out of rope. Just to drop me and watch me shit myself. My God. Anyway, picked up the bag, secured the bag. Absolutely no chance of climbing that. It's literally like slate. Like I think you'd even struggle with it. It was that was what I was thinking at the time. Like, if Ollie's not doing this, I'm not doing this. And so
I came into your mind when you thought about that. Near-death experience.
By this time, there's like a crowd of people down in the car park below, all looking up because they're like, "What's this guy doing? He's obviously like in the shit."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Boys, you're gonna have to pull me up. Like, plan B, you're gonna have to drag me up." At this point, communication's bad. They can't hear me. There's a bush in the way. It's like, could fray the rope and all this stuff. I'm like, man, this is not good. So I ended up like having to pendulum back and forth, like Indiana Jones style, to like jump and swing around into a crag where I could then like climb up. It took me a good like, I don't know, 25 minutes to climb up this like 10 meters. And I got to the start, like the top. And I just, mate, I've never known fear like
I
it.
have 2 questions from that. one, was the bag worth it? Was the bag worth it? I was about to say, and the second one was like, do you still have the bag?
Mate, the guy that took me abseiling wanted the bag after. He actually tried snatching it off me and claiming it's his. I was like, listen.
The whole fire, buddy.
Oh, yeah. We're going to have a
You
scrap.
pull the prank, you ain't getting the bag. That's not how it works.
Yeah. He got laughs, you got the bag.
Exactly. Yeah.
We all win.
Mate,
Do you win?
I don't
Is
think
it a
I
win?
win. I had
That's not really
bad
a
dreams
win, is
like
it?
that for a couple of weeks after.
I'm not surprised.
I understand those.
Did you have bad dreams after yours?
Yeah, still. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have one this morning.
Yeah, I get sudden intense visuals of it, and I'm like, oh god.
Touch wood. I haven't had anything
or
like
vomit.
that yet, but I'm sure it's coming.
Yeah.
Mate, the time will come.
I'm sure,
The time
yeah.
will come. Well, hopefully not, actually, maybe, but. So you were in the raving scene and you met people that kind of opened your eyes to the idea of, hey, I might actually be able to do something I love for a passion. What was the process from then, going from there to actually opening the doors?
Okay, so there's quite a good chunk of time between there. So went to uni, got into climbing a bit more there. That was good. I was doing journalism. That was really good, but I was just a little bit too young and stupid and immature to really study properly. So I also trained to be a chef in my spare time, sort of working for the rich and famous. Then I started my own chefing business, and I'd just been offered a job at a Michelin-starred restaurant in London. And then I had a day out on the Dorset coast, I think, where we were climbing at Winspit Quarry with some friends, and then we camped out in a little cave there, and I'd never camped out before, and like just waking up to the sound of the sea, cooking a little bacon butty in a little trangia, and I was just like, I am never going inside again. Because I love the kitchen. The kitchen was just such an amazingly intense and creative place. I love high pressure environments. And but I knew I was gonna have to give 10 to 15 years to my life to it before I ever got to a point where there was any kind of rest. In 16-hour shifts, like 4 or 5 times a week was pretty standard. Like the longest shift I did as a chef was 28 hours. It was an insane world, right?
Yeah.
So, and I like that, but then the climbing side is just like, why would I ever do anything else? So then I moved to Scotland to try and learn outdoor ed, spent 5 years in Scotland, some of the best years of my life. Totally, Scotland is boom. Wasn't for those feckin' midgies, but anyway. But I mean,
Almost a reason why you're now building the next site in Scotland.
yeah, I'm trying to get back.
Yes.
Yeah, trying to extend further north. So anyway, so then, yeah, me and the missus moved to Canada for a year. She had an exchange year, so I went climbing. That was good. Worked in construction for a bit. Then I came back and lived in Plymouth, actually, of all places.
Wow.
Yeah. I lived in Mutley there whilst I trained in Callington to be a secondary school teacher.
So you really have come from the rags.
Yeah.
It's a real rags
all
to
over-
riches story.
all over the
Come
shop,
from
yeah.
Motley.
Yeah. Mutley. Yeah, well, I tell you, see the year I lived in Plymouth, right?
Oh, so good.
So the year I lived in Plymouth, not only was the indoor wall there not worth climbing at in my view at the time, but it rained constantly, right, for that year. So I took up surfing and Thai boxing, right? So there was a Thai boxing studio in Mutley, so I went there and I turned up to school with black eyes and stuff, which was quite funny, and surfing. Which, you know, the only thing I'd give up climbing for would be surfing, but I'd have to live by the beach because if you don't do it all the time, you just get hammered.
What's up, you winners? Thank you for listening to the Two Beasts podcast so far. Just to let you know, this podcast is sponsored by Maven Visuals Ltd. Maven Visuals is the go-to for video production here in the southwest of England. So if your business needs fresh, engaging video content that will be sure to bring new sales into your company, then don't hesitate to get in touch at www.mavenvisuals.com. Back to the podcast. Okie doke. So where were we then? So you got to the stage. You were in Mutley.
You were Mutley, yeah. You were down in the sticks.
Of all places, it was in
Of
Mutley.
all places, you're down in the sticks.
Good time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you were in Mutley. What happened in Mutley?
Thai boxing and surfing, basically. It rained so much. I mean, me and the missus went on a 3-week climbing trip in Cornwall that July, and we surfed 20 days out of 21. So the only place...
It's a surfing trip, not a climbing trip.
Yeah, because it rained
Yeah.
every day, with the exception of when we went to Bossigran. There was the number of days we'd racked up, and literally, as I touched the rock, right, boom, there's the rain. So, but I mean, that's a first world problem, isn't it? You surf 20 days out of 21 on a climbing
It's also
trip.
a southwest problem for sure.
Yeah.
Just rains all the time.
I thought this was the sunny bit of England.
Yeah.
It's the bloody south. Anyway, so I got better at surfing and worse at climbing.
Nice.
But there you go, fun times. So, what were we even talking about?
Moving into starting the hangar.
So, more or less, so I went into teaching because obviously I like working with young people and you get paid absolutely sweet FA if you're working in outdoor ed. So, and thought, right, I actually need to build a life for me and Steph. So, earning peanuts, is not going to help that happen. So, went to become a secondary school teacher. Did 2 years at that at a great school up in Newcastle, where we moved to because there was both surfing and climbing. So we just drew a map of the UK of where there was fun things, and I only applied for jobs in those places. So I got a job there, and that was cool. I actually really, really liked teaching, but the institutions of schools do not work very well with somebody who is as inattentive and undetailed and radically disorganized as I am. It's the best way to
honesty
describe
in
it.
that statement.
Yeah, let's be completely honest.
Yeah.
I cried the day I left because my tutor group were awesome. They were just good people, even the naughty ones, they're just little human beings trying to find their way in the world. So that was good, but that gave us enough stability. And then, I decided to go into business with Chris to start the hangar because we were introduced and he's like, I want to build a wall and own it, but I don't want to run it. And I'm like, all right, cool, I'll run it. So I took Steph to Font. I remember we were staying in a little tiny place in Buron Marlot or something like that. And I was like, babes. And she was like, what do you want? She knows the voice. And I'm like, oh, big question coming up. I'm like, do you mind if I quit my job as a teacher and risk everything that we've got on a climbing wall? She was like, do you have to? And I'm like, I really want to. And she's like, go on then. She's so chill. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. That's great. Well, it's a special someone, to have someone like that 100%. By your side that's happy for you to just be like,
So there's definitely there's other partners out there that would have vetoed that decision, and imagine what would have happened if they did.
Yeah, sensible people.
I wouldn't have a job.
You wouldn't.
I wouldn't even have a job, so it's like I'd be working for whoever. But
So you started the Climbing Hangar, and presumably was it a smooth ride the first hangar? Or did it just kind of open up and start working? Or
total chaos. I mean, honestly, it's so before the hangar, I just didn't really understand what mental illness was. So at about year 3 or 4, I think I had a relatively low level breakdown. Things just went to pieces. So to give you a sense, so I had to sell everything that I owned. So even my bike, Because I didn't have any cash, right? And there was no one I was going to get any cash from. So I went in with two people, Crispin, a guy called Darren. Turned out Darren was a bad man, like a genuine bad man. So we
like
had
a bad man or a bad, like a bad man?
Not like a bad man,
Not
like as in
bad.
like, like bad man ting,
Yeah.
because we're both jungle fans,
We are,
presumably.
yeah.
So not
Yeah.
bad man ting.
No.
More just a lying bastard.
Just bad man.
Yeah. So it took
yeah.
about something like cost nearly 100 grand to get rid of him.
Shit.
Yeah, in legal fees and buyout fees. So then I had to spend the next 18 months living in a cupboard at work on furniture I've made out of bits of pallet. Before that was a cool hipster thing.
So when you
that just
had-
meant you didn't have any money.
So did you have two at this time, or was it just the one? You
No,
still had-
this is inside the first 6 months.
Oh, shit.
Like it went wrong fast. Like fast.
Oh my god.
What was that like? How was that between you and Steph? Like justifying that, like, hey, we took this risk, and
Oh mate, it was brutal. Like, I mean, it was, we've been together 21 years in January. And so by that stage, we've been together for more than a decade. And I think that was the first thing, even close to a rough patch. Because I mean, I didn't have any idea what I was doing and we didn't have any money. And now I suddenly had, I think the business went from being profitable to like taking a beating. And then I had 50 grand's worth of debt, like in the space of a week. And then I think I finished paying off that debt a few months ago.
wow, Jesus, that's stuck with you for a while.
And
too.
and that has, I own a relatively small portion of the business now by comparison to what I should have done. So, because I've had to sell so much of it because I had nothing else, So yeah, I mean that was a really interesting journey. But like Steph is an incredibly wise person. So at the beginning, when I was like fantasizing about doing things that were not legal to Darren, legal or moral, necessarily, she's like, listen, you got to look at it this way. She goes, if you go to jail for being a dickhead, she goes, I'm not waiting. She goes, someone's done something wrong to you, right? And you can either ruin your rest of your life with it, or you can resolve just to be better.
Yeah.
And she goes, if you really want to rub it in his face, make it the best thing you possibly can.
Yeah, that's powerful.
And then, but yeah, it was very powerful. But also, like, without being overly angry at him, he was a person who'd clearly had lots of things happen to him in his life, right? He didn't trust people, but he made it so obvious in his behavior that he didn't trust you that everybody went out of their way to piss him off. Like whether it was the builders, the number of electricians we had leave site and things like that. So this was a distrustful human being who made people then not act trustfully because of his behavior. So I can kind of understand the relationship between the two things. So then for me, I was like, okay, what have I learned here? And my key learning was learn to trust properly. And I did trust Darren. The mistake I made was I didn't create a £750 shareholders agreement document because I thought it was too expensive. And the lawyer who offered to do it for me for cheap still climbs at Matchworks now. And I went and told him about it and he laughed and he says, I need to use you as a testimonial. Because when he said to me, 750 quid, I'll do your shareholders agreement, in my head, being like the freewheeling hippie that I was like, we do things on trust, man, it's cool. Right, and then obviously that cost us 100 grand.
Man,
Hey, live and you learn, man. You live and you learn.
Like, that's one of them learnings where you just like, okay, trusting is cool. Not leaving yourself open to getting completely cleaned out is very, very wise.
It's funny you talk about how you handle that though and what Steph said, because I saw a thing of Alex. Do you know Alex Hormozy? Have you heard of him?
No.
So he's a guy, I think he's a business owner and entrepreneur.
yeah, he's just like a.
Yeah, he does a lot. But his thing, and I was listening to a podcast with him the other day on it, and he was saying how, because he had the same thing with his dad, where he basically wanted to become so successful just to rub it in his dad's face. Or like do something just to rub it in his dad's face. And what he actually said was the best form of revenge is success.
Yeah.
Like, forget about them. It's now been like, right, how do I make this the best thing? Like Steph said, make it the best thing possible. Because that's where you learn and improve and grow. So yeah, making it the best thing you can.
It's a similar thing with the guy I went uni with, Luke, is one of my closest friends. We're in the same business, both in video work. And at the start, we both worked together a lot and like helped each other out on jobs and all that. And we made an agreement because we kind of foresaw this issue. Like getting money involved often stresses things out, and like you've got to be clear about things right from the get-go.
Yeah.
So we kind of made a pact from day one. Like, we're never going to do each other any favors. If I need you, I pay you. If you need me, you pay me. Simple as that. And I think that's just, in some ways, it's kind of a red flag. Like when you do things based on trust, if you trust someone, then you're like, cool, so we need a shareholders document, right? We need to get this sorted out legally, right? And there's no like weirdness about that. As soon as somebody starts going, well, don't you trust me, bro? It's like pretty freaky, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's it. What I think is I kind of understand both sides, right? Because obviously writing a contract is complicated, right? And obviously there's like a tier, like there's certain things that, clearly you wouldn't really require having to verbalize the contract either, whether it's a verbal agreement or whatever. So I think trust is a really powerful thing, and I think it's underutilized, but I think it's used the wrong way, because I think in the professional world, what happens is when we lose trust, what we do is we make regulations, we make operating procedures, because we no longer trust people to make the best decisions. But also we live largely in a blame culture. So when somebody does make a mistake, we blame them for it. So then the person wants an operating procedure or a rule book, because then they can say, well, I just did what was in the rule book. So a lack of trust, I think, is a massive problem, because it means that you have to replace it with admin. And nobody likes admin, but nobody likes getting blamed. So if we could reduce the level of blame, we could reduce the level of admin, and we can increase the amount of trust. So like I would look at it as if you trust people, there's a cost, right? So like electricity, right? I love lights and electricity and stuff, it's great, but there is a bill, right? And I think trust is the same. It's exceptionally useful, really powerful, incredibly versatile for getting shit done, but there's a bill. And somebody in the trust framework is going to screw you. But what you don't see is when you don't use a trust framework, what you're paying for is less things get done a lot of the time, and you've got to write a lot more documents, and you've got to spend a lot more time preparing to do anything. So I think they've both got a place, and I think really thinking about trust, because that was one of my primary reflections on that whole experience, was look at what not trusting did. So the way people responded to him, to be fair, wasn't very nice, right? They could have been better. His treatments of people was only indicated that he didn't trust you, right? But he wasn't honestly being like a twat or anything, if you know what I mean, most of the time. So, but a lack of trust was creating these really strange behaviors that then created this like conflict cycle. So I think, yeah, if that makes sense, I think trust needs to be used. I think when the relationship is critical, you always contract, because what you've got to protect again, what you've got to protect is the relationship. That's the most important thing. In 5 years' time, you'll forget about the conflict, but you'll definitely remember that you've lost a mate.
Yeah.
And that's what you'll carry with you. And I've made that mistake more than once.
That makes complete sense, yeah. So your conclusion from trusting you got burnt by trusting someone, but actually the reason was he didn't trust people. So you actually doubled down rather than back down.
Yeah, but that doubling down also now involves protection, which means that if I can trust, so let's say, for instance, so Ollie and I work together. Let's say you upset me somehow, right? I can automatically...
I set a blue or a purple that he doesn't like.
Yeah, like it's both too long and too short. All at the same time.
I do everything. I can't lie. I don't know how I do it.
He makes all of the mistakes at once. It's amazing. But with anybody that I work with, let's say they upset me in some way. I would automatically default now to, do I trust that is a decent human being who almost, like in 99.9% certainty, was not attempting to do a bad job, was not attempting to annoy me. And that all of a sudden, all of the stress is gone. Now I can see the situation more clearly. It's not just my emotions kicking off. So the trust component there is, do I trust this person to be decent? And if I do, I don't need to worry about their intentionality. And sometimes we've all messed up when we were trying our best, upset someone by accident. So because we've all done it, I think you can bring trust back in. When the consequences of something going wrong are really significant, you should bring trust and contract in at the same time. And I just think that's a good thing. And anybody who doesn't see the seriousness and why the contract is there to protect everyone, it's not a lack of trust, it's because of the importance of everything being protected, especially the relationship. That's like you say, if someone says, don't you trust me? Like I do, but if this goes wrong, I still want to trust you and like you again in the future.
Yeah.
Right, and that to me is that's hard, but that's countercultural. That's not how we work as humans normally. And I think getting over that discomfort is really important. Does that make sense? It's not quite doubling down. There's now more tools in the toolbox of trusting and how it's done.
Yeah, well, also I think when you get to the stage that you're at, where you're running multiple centers and a massive business, like it's the whole classic, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with people. Like you cannot get around delegation. So you've kind of got two options in your position, right? You either have to trust people and know that sometimes you're going to get screwed, but learn how to at least, maybe get the right character so that you minimize the risk of that. Or you just try and do everything yourself, have a complete meltdown and fuck it all up.
Yep. And I did that. I would not recommend it. That was sucky.
Don't go down that road.
Yeah. So, but at the same time as well, I think the other thing is, and like in business land, it's a bit funny, right? A lot of founders are quite quirky, right? Because you're first up, you feel like you're best dressed. Whereas actually, I just think I was one of the first up. I don't think being the founder makes me the best or the smartest or anything. It just means I was the founder. And I think if you go bigger than that, then you can start to create your own myth a little bit. And once you start believing that, once you start to believe that nobody will do a good job as I will, I think you're going down the wrong path. So there's people I work with now that are ninjas, right? And I would never be able to produce work to their standard because they are much better than me. And actually, I think trusting the idea, is trust again, trusting the idea that I don't need to be the biggest, brightest and smartest. Actually, I trust that my job is to find the best people I can get my hands on. And if they're not smarter than me, imagine me being the ceiling of the business. You know, I don't even have a very good education. You know, like, I mean, I'm not the best climber. I don't think I'm the best at anything. So, you know, but if I can find somebody who is, right, and I don't have to feel too bad about that, you know.
That's just stunting your growth essentially, isn't it? Because if you just think you're at the top, then you're not going to improve.
Yeah.
You need to make sure there's like no ceiling whatsoever and building that, like the best team you possibly can around you to help you. So, and we've said it multiple times in this podcast, nobody's that like, oh yeah, man, I'm self-made. It's like, no, you're not. Think about the amount of people that have had you to get you to this position, you know, like,
and not only
so
that,
important.
If you think, go back 20 years, bouldering was, no one liked bouldering.
No.
I didn't like bouldering. I didn't like bouldering until I started climbing at Climb Newcastle, because it was 500 metres away from my house and it was a half an hour drive to Sunderland Wall, which had a 28 metre lead wall, which is obviously for me, I was like, oh my God, right? But Climb Newcastle I could walk to, and it was my first year as a teacher, so I had no time. And then all of a sudden I'm like, wow, bouldering's sick. But like 20 years ago, no one really bouldered.
It was the training for rope climbing, that's what bouldering was.
Bouldering walls, I simply don't even believe could have worked 20 years ago. You know?
Until that mindset shifted.
So I'm not, you know, so no one in bouldering is self-made.
No.
Right? The world was in the right place for bouldering to work, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
What makes a good employee?
So the best humans in the hangar are those people who are working for themselves. They're not working for the hangar. So they turn up to work, and it's their hour, it's their minute, it's their day. They're getting something out of it. They wouldn't do a shit job, not because someone's watching them, but because they're going to work anyway. So they may as well do it the best they can, learn something and progress.
Got you.
Because if you're working for me, you've got to wait for me to do everything for you, right? And the best ones are all working for themselves. So Carly, who's our head of training and recruitment, started as a cleaner, you know, and then she just like basically got after it. So Mick, who's our Northern Regional Manager, again, he started as a general manager. Lee started as crew. He's now running Matchworks around the corner. These people are not waiting for permission to do a good job. If they see an opportunity, they chase it down.
And there are businesses as well that kind of, what's the word? They cultivate that culture of waiting to be told what to do. When you get to the admin stage, I used to work in a shop, and I know that like shops are pretty much all like, you know, retail, hygiene standards, like checklists for this, the fridge has got to be a certain temperature, but it's like as soon as anything was wrong, that was bad news. You were attacked. So therefore it reached a point where if there was a decision that needed to be made, there were some people in there that would say, you know what, I'm going to make a choice. Like, I got to make the call, let's do it. And they were ultimately the heroes, but more often than not, they would get punished for it. So most people ended up just saying, you know, picking up the phone, ringing the manager when she's on an evening off at like 9 p.m. saying, oh, what should we do about this?
Yeah, because why would you think for yourself?
Why would you? Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's society as well, though, isn't it? It's a societal thing nowadays. The amount of people that don't want to think for themselves is getting bigger from what I can see. But
I always try and stay away from making a generalized statement. I think the world of work treats people in a certain way, which creates something since there's a relationship between the things. But then, did work start it or did people start it? And I think Britain has tended, I still think the class system is very strong in Britain. I still think, you know, class and social hierarchies are a really dominant component of our society. And not many people get rewarded for thinking for themselves. So why would you do it? You know, and I think that's part of the illness, if you like, in that sense. And then, so then people don't think for themselves. And then I know lots of business owners who think their employees don't think for themselves, whereas knowing these business owners, they definitely don't let their employees think for themselves. You know, so I'm looking at them kind of like, I think
what do you expect, sort of thing. Yeah. So it's more like a cultural type of thing.
Just for confidentiality, I'm not going to say exactly who it is. A very close member of my family works for a national company. And they train people in that national company. So some of the students came in, these adult students, late to the class. He goes, like, where have you been? Go with me for a poo. I said, well, why didn't you go for a poo before? And I go, we don't poo on our own time, we only poo on company time, right? And like, that's it then, they'll save up their poo, right? Because they hate the way the company treats them that much that that's them taking something back. That's to the employer, is they will only poo when they're being paid for it.
Yeah.
Nice.
That's actually, that happened all the time at the shop too. Like, it was like, I'm going to put on company time. Like, it's such a weird, like, it's such a weird sensitive thing to do. It makes sense, but at the same time, I don't know. I think it's a mix of two things. One, I think there's a lot of bad employers out there that are getting it wrong, that are not delegating, not trusting. Like I say, I completely agree with that. And then I think the other part of that that's enabling it is the sort of cultural move towards comfort, because all business is solving a problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
So like we were saying this on another podcast, like, because I like capitalism, but the downside of it, because there's a downside to all things, is that the culture is dictated by businesses. And businesses, the number one rule is solve a problem, remove a pain, take the pain point out. And so the whole society has moved to, hey, let's get rid of pain. Pain's bad. Struggle's bad. Self-development's bad. And so that's why you got this like perfect marry of employers that want to be tyrants and do everything themselves, and people who just want to live in comfort and peace and not have to do anything. And making your own decisions and trying to take risks and kind of bring your own ideas to the table is very scary, very uncomfortable. Yeah. And I think that's generally shied away from or discouraged by the situation that we're in societally.
I'd agree with that. Yeah. I think the other issue with capitalism over time is that its goal is efficiency. So, and I couldn't tell you how many times I use the word efficiency in a day. Like, it's kind of sickening, right? But like, if you think about the human experience, how would you efficiently look at a sunset, or appreciate some music or something like that? So to some extent, let's say we imagine that capitalism was not ideological, right? It was just a system for producing profit or whatever, right? So, but in the end, it strips away the human bit. And I think because that's what it's necessary to do. So a friend of mine's just finished his thesis on street cleaners in Scotland, right? So strange thesis, but basically the street cleaning system was redesigned by top management using software, right? So they didn't even ask the street cleaners, right? So more or less what turns out, the street cleaners had all of the parts of their job that they actually felt were worthwhile and contributing back to their community and gave them a sense of pride as an individual, and they just stripped all of that out. Right, and it was more efficient, but then what happened is, all of the street cleaners were completely disenfranchised. So they started doing a worse job because now they were robots and they knew they were robots. So, and I think that's kind of one of the dangers, is efficiency is part of the prize, but if it's all of the prize, then you destroy the human bit, and none of us like that in the end.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And I think that's where the resistance is, the active resistance, pooing on company time, not making your own decisions. Well, I think that's an active resistance.
I'd just like to say my poos just so happen to sort of arrive as I get to work. It's not like there's no correlation
it's
there.
Not a thing.
It's not a thing. That's not start work, but also
I'm going to email Dan after this. I'm going to be like, start AJ's shift 15 minutes earlier.
OJ starts at 8:15 now rather than 8.
And I want him stood outside of the door with his watch.
Time it, go.
Right, if it takes too long, you're eating more fibre, son.
Yeah, Weetabix for you for breakfast.
That's it. 3 Weetabix at the start of every shift. Get on that.
Well, if you were an employer that really wanted to stop people pooing on company time, you could just slip Imodium into everything.
Yeah,
cause chaos.
Yeah.
That'd be
everyone running around. Holding on, like, don't know what's going on.
Oh man. I was going to say something about that. Yeah, the human element. One of the things that I've kind of realized, I think maybe you can shed some light on this. I think maybe because I'm a young man, I might be becoming a man, like slowly, might be getting there.
I'm still waiting on it happening
eventually,
to me.
Maybe. But one of the reasons I say this is because I've started becoming way more like family centric in my own mindset. Like, the thing that gives me the biggest source of strength now, when I'm like doing something that's hard, I rarely think about what I'm going to get from it anymore. It's all about, if I do this, that'll help Ollie out. Like, if I sit here and edit this podcast, if I stay up late and get this podcast bashed out, like, me and Ollie will have something. Or like, if I'm in the gym training or something, if like, I might be able to carry someone out of a fire now, like something like that. And I think that's maybe the human element, that there's such a big source of strength in doing things for other people and as part of a community, that if you do just strip it out and make it all about, hey, it's intrinsic, extrinsic motivation in it, to put like the blanket kind of educational term on it if you're going to GCSE level. But if it's all about what you get and the cash, the paycheck you get at the end, you're just not going to go that far. It's very, very hard to do certain things.
Well, I think what is interesting is I think dysfunctional mindsets are highly productive, right? So if you've got major self-image or self-worth issues, right, that can be incredibly productive. It's a monster driver, very, very powerful. You'll never be happy, right? You'll never get to a point where you're satisfied or fulfilled, but it does produce a lot of stuff. And I can comment on this from a very personal level. So all of my work with a therapist is to do with, I want to feel more content, right? So there's elements of my worldview that I've got to change, but I've got to be very, very careful, in a sense, not to take away the engine of productivity that I actually also really enjoy. I just kind of need a different framework for seeing the same things, right? But I think I was listening to one of your earlier podcasts where you were getting dissed by someone called Josh, who said that your podcast felt like it lasted 2 weeks.
Mate, don't bring up Josh.
I wanted to know. Hopefully Josh has got something to say about this one, but we'll see. But you were talking about like retiring, not wanting to screw plastic to a wall until you were 70 and stuff, and it's interesting because when I started the hangar, my goal was to get to part-time work and work no more than 6 months a year as fast as possible. In 2016, I'd had a month off, right? I was in Yosemite, I got one email whilst I was there from the team, right? So, and I was about to make that transition, if you like, as in, okay, I think I've set things up well enough, right? Whereas that's when climbing was really starting to go big on a global level. And I sat there in Yosemite and I thought, like I'm in paradise as far as I'm concerned, right? And I can more or less stay here if I want to, like I'll be here a lot. But at the same time, I can go climbing a lot. I already have been, but I've just been served up like let's call it a cosmic opportunity just for fun, right? So like I'm in the right place at the right time. Like how often does that happen? And I'm like, do I really want to not give this a good punt, right? So there it was, retirement, semi-retirement, working part-time, which is all I really wanted, had arrived. And now this opportunity was here. And then my mum was like, well, when are you going to stop? And I'm like, I reckon 4 will be good. Where I'm now, I'm like, 40 or whatever. Like, I mean, just keeps going. But the thing is like now, I wouldn't even want to retire. Like, I definitely want to work less, without a shadow of a doubt. But I think what I've learned, the people I've worked with, the networking experience that I've got, my golden dream now would be to be what's called like a non-exec, right? Which is to go and advise younger businesses, from people basically who were me like 10 years ago, and try and be useful, because I feel it would be scandalous if I didn't put these skills to work. Whereas, like even 8 years ago, if someone had said that to me, I would have been like, you're bonkers. I just want to go climbing all the time, which I do. Like I always want to go climbing more. At the end of a 7-week climbing trip, I felt like I hadn't done enough and felt bad about how I hadn't scheduled my climbing trip better to get more done. You can see why I see a therapist, right? Yeah. So I'd climb for every daylight hour for 7 weeks. I don't know how I could have done any more. Anyway, so yeah, like it's kind of funny. I think the purpose bit, and that's the difference, because when we talk about work, and you're asking like, who's the best employee? Well, what makes an amazing employee? I think basically they're entrepreneurs. So whereas I might have been an entrepreneur like in the world, it's just a context, isn't it? So you can still be an entrepreneur in the space, right? And that's one of the reasons why you're doing what you're doing, right? Is because it was obvious that if Dan wasn't around, you were still going to get after it anyway.
Yeah.
You actually want to make, how does ratering work really well? So everyone's happy, the team are refreshed, they're not burnt out, we get the product. Because that's engineering of a sort, isn't it? So that sense of development, like what do most people do when they retire? Like they start learning something new, or they take up a sport. So they do basically what we already do. They're in a sort of a phase of like learning and development and growth. And I think the problem with the work label sometimes is we're in a world where everyone's got a side hustle or is attempting to make money off Instagram. And I know a lot of Instagram influencers. In fact, I met one at the ABC conference the other day, and he's sponsored by another international brand, and he was burnt out. And he's like, I am sick of this. And he's just like, I'd like out. He just wants to go back to doing his normal job as a programmer. He doesn't want to document every second of his life, and he doesn't want to answer people anymore. He doesn't want to be the voice for his community. So I think work is funny, because whether it's work or whether it's not, I think it's a very personal decision. But if you can turn whatever it is that you're doing into something purposeful, then it's different.
Well, that was why we started this podcast in many regards. Like, and you talk about like a cosmic opportunity. It's essentially what it was. Like, literally, I was sat like this on the sofa playing the PlayStation, and then he comes down the stairs, and we kind of just went, I thought we should start a podcast. And we've been talking about it for ages, and then that was it. 10, 15 minutes, had the setup, and then that was it. And that was episode 1, and now we're episode 10.
Yeah, I mean, to my mind, like, you know, regardless of whether or not you go for a job or you try and be an entrepreneur or whatever you decide work is for you, like, sitting around doing nothing is still sitting around doing nothing.
Yeah.
And that was like what we had, a lot of extra time.
Yeah.
So it's like, why not put it into something that might or might not?
So you're basically semi-retired to an extent, if you think about what that means, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
And now you've made yourself a job.
Yeah, I guess so.
So when we think about the work label, I think the work label is a massive problem because like culturally, especially internet-wise, social media-wise, that's the thing you're not supposed to be doing. You're supposed to have hacked your way out of that, and you're hacking your way into it. You know, from a position of having loads of spare time. What do I want? Spare time. You add it. What are you doing?
Yeah.
How do I get more of that thing that you used to have and have less of now? You know, like, I mean, we're insane, right, as a species, right? And I think when you get the insanity of it, you know, so some people drive for a living. They're a courier. Other people drive cars for fun, like you drive fun. Dan drives for fun, right? So, but if you had to use that car to deliver Amazon parcels day in, day out, it would stop being fun pretty fast. Even if you went dead quick, right? I'm sure by the end of the week, you'd be like, I wish I was doing anything else. So, I mean, this is quite silly, but I like it. The cutlery drawer, right, in our dishwasher, right, I like to stack it really neatly. All of the forks in the same way, then all of the knives. And it's quite sad, right? But in the end, I'm going to stack the cutlery in there anyway, but if I do it neatly, it looks nice, but then when I take it out, I can just go, whew, there's all the forks, and they move into the fork bit of the cutlery drawer in one fluid motion.
Function and form all at once.
It's just trying to find those little bits of joy in stuff that's otherwise utterly mundane. The dishwasher, like, I'm going to put the stuff in it. Why not do it in a way that just gives me a little comedy tickle? You know, where it's just like, that wasn't a completely wasted couple of seconds. And, you know, and it's just translating something that I could have been bored shitless into something nice.
What's up, winners? If you're loving this podcast, make sure to drop us a 5-star review on Spotify. And if you aren't already, be sure to follow us on our social media channels. That's YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. 2 Beast Podcast, the number 2 Beast Podcast. Let's get back to the show. In that way, what made you transition from going from a one-site business to deciding to get to whatever we're at now, 9 nearly?
Coming on for 9.
Yeah.
Slightly hazy, I suppose. There was a wall in London called Urban Ascent that my best friend had helped build, and my other best friend from school, the 2 guys who got me into climbing, had painted. So that was in Parsons Green in London, and the guys who had started it were having some issues and wanted to sell it. And they offered it to me. So I thought, multisite. Cool. So, and despite not really being into work generally, I am constantly kind of like looking for new forms of stimulation. So it's like, cool, let's do that. So I crowdfunded £250,000 out of our customer base at the time. So used that to buy and refit Urban Ascent. That was our first journey into multi-site. And then that also helped fund building Plymouth. And then Steve Challoner, who came on as part of that. So basically him and his wife, Isabel Syndicus, put up that $250,000, and they were like, we really love the hangar, we love what you do community-wise and everything, so we'd like to invest in it. And then Steve had retired as an electrical engineer, but the job he'd always wanted was to be an architect, right? So he got to help project manage building Plymouth and work with the architects and look at the drawings. So, I mean, it was hardcore, because none of us exactly knew what we were doing, to be fair. And and obviously you got to spin to Plymouth. It's still, I think, a beautiful centre.
Amazing centre, yeah.
And
no bias, obviously.
Yeah, so Steve bought himself a job, right, to an extent, but had a banging time. And even though we're going over budget, that insane log burner that's in there, that was his kind of sacred cow. He's like, we're putting it in. I'm like, Steve, that's Benny, mate. And he's like, we're putting it in. And I'm like, no. No
budge. No budge. Yeah, I want the log burner.
So, and sure enough, obviously it's stunning, like in winter, isn't it? So that took us to Plymouth. And then at that stage, I actually decided to go and try and learn how to run a business.
That's That's so good. I love how you're right. I'm at 3 sites now. I should probably learn how this stuff works.
Yeah. So we still had no one working in finance.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it was still bananas, right?
Yeah.
So,
But isn't that kind of the beauty of it in some way? Like just having that sort of chaos and just learning as you go along and trying to figure stuff out. And,
yeah.
You know, because
Well,
you've said it before, and you said it the other week in terms of like with your business degree. You're like, I learned more in the first 3 weeks of running my own business than I did an entire
the 3 years course.
3 year
100%.
course.
Yeah,
So,
first 3 weeks for sure.
Well, it's
that's
applied,
like
isn't it?
Yeah.
So when you study, it's generic. When you're doing it on the hoof, it's applied.
Yeah.
But what was interesting, so the business course I did, if it's still running, if you can get on it, I would. So Goldman Sachs, after they helped ruin the world in 2008 by screwing everyone over financially, tried to make amends by running this kind of like free business training course for entrepreneurs. So there's some qualifying things to get into it. It's called 10,000 Small Businesses, and I went on it, and it was mind-blowing. Like, it was all free, and it was so good. Like, it changed my whole world, honestly, to be fair. And they had some of the best speakers in the country in the various different areas. So we were being taught at the Oxford University Side Business School, so like the level of teaching was mind-bogglingly good. And so is the support network afterwards. So, and I was like, okay, I now understand why this business is so hard to run and what I needed to change, which was I needed somebody else's money to grow it, because I don't know how to get it from day one to maximum capacity as quickly as possible. Because at the time it was taking 5-ish years. Right, so, and we experimented with some new ideas in Plymouth that grew faster than anywhere else. So, all kinds of stuff. So I did that, and I was like, okay, so I need investors. So through a friend of a friend who happens to be both working private equity land and climbing, I worked with him, and he's like, this is a savage world because you can't go into this alone. And he basically taught me and protected me to get in there with the right kind of deal, with the right kind of investor, with the right kind of plan.
I was going to ask you about that. So tell me more about the investment side of it, because I've seen people reach a stage where they get investors in the past, and it's kind of like at that point, to a certain degree, even if you own a lot of your business, it's no longer your business because you've got people with a vested interest in. You've got your contracts, everything's all trusted but also firmly sealed, and now they have a say in what you do. Yeah. What was the kind of justification for bringing them in, and what is the kind of give us an insight into what it's like to work with investors?
So the justification initially, again, as I was saying, so I don't come from money, right? And also the way I had run the business up until that time was not profitable. So the arrangement that I had with the existing shareholders, I didn't really get paid very much. So up until halfway through 2018, I got paid less than what we would pay a centre manager now. And that was running 3 centres with like 100 employees and so on. And the aspiration for me to be paid more was not what really there with my partners, right? So I was like, okay, so, and of course, at that stage, had we have made profit, I would have got some dividend, but I owned a relatively small share of the business. So if you look at it, I suppose, whilst I never thought exactly in this way, why would I bother making any dividend, right? Because really, my aspiration at the time is just make this pie big. So then when you get some dividend, right, that small percentage that you've got is worth it, because I'm doing all of the graft, right? So I ain't giving money to anybody right now. I'm just going to grow the business. So that was kind of the thing. And then I sort of realized that there was a limit to how we would be able to grow, to how fast those businesses became profitable, how much profit they made. And I was just convinced, I suppose, and this is where my self-doubt comes in. I was like, there's no way I'm running this business as well as it can be run. Right, so you look out into the marketplace of people who are good at stuff, right, and they're expensive. And I'm like, right, so we can't afford any of them because like that person there gets paid 3 times what I get paid right now, right? So, it was like, it wasn't just a bit of difference. It was like, holy shit, like, like real world wages are hardcore, right, for clever, skilled people. So I had to go and I then thought, okay, well, let's get investors, and it allowed me to restructure the company. So I get paid what I think my market rate is, and I can grow the business, but actually I can also lift the wages of everybody else in the business. Mm-hmm. So Dan sent me one of his paychecks when he first started working with us, and I think he probably pays more in tax in a month now than he used to get paid. Right.
Yeah, he's told me about that many times.
I mean, it's frightening. I don't know how we didn't starve. I really don't. Like, I look back and I'm like, why did we do it? It was insane. Anyway, so then you go in with investors. Now, in the end, I think a lot of people get sidetracked by the money, right? Investors have money, but money is like a product on a shelf. That money has a cost, and it has terms, and it has a relationship attached to it, right? So it's not just cash. So, because there's lots of different kinds of cash on investors' shelves, and you choose the product that you want. But the most important thing is to choose the investor that you want to work with. Because when it's easy, when you're beating forecast, everyone's happy. Back's getting slapped, high fives all around. Right, when things are hard, right, let's say, for instance, you had a global pandemic or cost of living crisis, for instance, the relationship with the investor is now crucial, right? Because that's the point whether you're going to go insane, right, get sued, get fired, lose your mental health, right? So the relationship that you have with those people needs to be pretty tight and pretty trusting. So the guy who advised me, Sam Davies, was just said, relationships are everything, and guided me towards the right relationships rather than the most cash or just the best terms. So anyway, so I think largely we've got a pretty good relationship with our investor. It's not always super smooth. That's natural. Their interests are not exactly the same as yours. So there is a bit of healthy conflict. But I suppose the way I look at it now is you do give up a lot of control, but then also it brings in some pretty ferocious discipline, right? Which is now you've got to answer for yourself. So now, you know, so when we opened Plymouth, for instance, this was 2018, wasn't it? It was 2018,
yeah. 2018, yeah.
So Dan obviously wanted to spend a lot more money, right, on climbing holds, because he's the director of climbing, he likes climbing, right? So anyway, so we opened with X amount, and Dan wanted twice as much. Anyway, so we opened, and the first week was like boom, boom, so busy. I was like, Dan, would we have made any more money if we'd spent an extra 30 or 40 grand on holds? And he said no. And then I'm like, right. Because that means we made the right decision. Yeah. Right. So what you've then got to do, the investor forces you to understand why things work, which when you want to innovate and take a risk, it drives you insane, right? Because there's no way when we started the hangar, right, that location, so criminal gangs were using that street, someone was threatened with an axe, prostitutes were using it. The first day we tried to get in with the landlord, someone had changed the locks because they'd hidden stolen vans in the warehouse, right? I mean, so like no one will put money into that. That's why investors need entrepreneurs, because we're the stupid people that take all of the risks. And once you've survived long enough, then they'll put some money in. And now they say, well, how does it work? So you've then got to slowly, like a Jenga block, take out all of the irrelevant blocks to keep the whole thing up. And then, of course, what tends to happen in the end is the investor forces you to take out too many blocks and it falls over. That's when businesses get shit. So, but that tends to happen further down. We're you know, hopefully a decade at least away from that. So, but you do give up control, but I think in the end, it has made us much better. I think we're smarter now. I think because we have to answer for our decisions, we have to have a strategy, we have to have a budget. So if you plan a budget and you don't spend it, you're in trouble. Now, you said you needed that. Somebody else could have used that money. Marketing could have used that money, you know, but we didn't use it because it was yours and you haven't spent it. Why have you not spent it? You know, so you actually get a lot more forensic about everything you're doing, which I think in the end is actually quite good.
Was there a concern? Was it like a publicly known thing that you started getting investors in, and was it like a concern for people or not really?
It wasn't publicly known. Right. So, but it was a concern for me. But to be totally honest, right, so I've always been quite left my whole life, right? I actually think capitalism is a massive problem, to be fair. Right. So I've been on anti-capitalist marches, all kinds of stuff. And I think one of the issues with investors specifically is they're greedy and impatient. Right, if our investors wanted to make the same return over, say, a 10-year cycle, we could do so much more that was good for people, planet, and long-term profit, but not short-term profit. Right? Because you invest in the business in a different way. If your horizon's further away, right? So if you were staying in your house for another 5 years, you might paint the living room if you thought it was crap. But if you're moving out in 6 months, you're not going to. Right, so it's that same kind of thing. So the reason I got involved is basically as a form of political activism. That might seem really strange. I thought, how much of a good job can I do inside a private equity space? Because if I can make a decent business that's good for everyone and good for the investor, then I will be another example of how investors can invest in socially responsible businesses and make money. Where do I want investors thinking about putting their money? BP or indoor climbing? And I want it to be indoor climbing because we've done a solid job of being a brilliant company. So that's my personal mission. That's my purpose bit. That's my attempt to use my skills and intelligence for the right way.
Do you think there's a risk that they will end up taking over the industry?
No. No, because most climbing walls don't make enough money and they don't make it fast enough. And also most people running climbing walls are passionate climbers, which obviously I am. But if the passion comes before the business, you are not credible. They won't touch you.
I was going to touch on that. So what is it? Why do you think it's so important that the climbing industry now takes on investors in some regard?
I think,
depending on where they're at in terms of like as they are as a business.
I don't think it is important. I just wanted to get in first, basically. We were the first. And I thought, so when in 2014, so like Shauna still worked for the hangar, right? It was one site, yeah? So Shauna used to like teach the kids classes and stuff, work on the desk. She went to her first World Cup and then straight off the bat, she podiumed and got sponsored by Adidas and Red Bull, right? And if you think in 2014, even in England, right? Almost nobody knew who Shauna was. Competition climbing was not cool, and indoor climbing was still the thing you only did when you had to, right? So if you could go outside, you went outside. That's where the sport was. So when Red Bull, of all people, sponsored Shauna, right? I stopped and thought, hold on, what's about to change, right? Because they sponsored Formula One, people jumping out of space in balloons and shit, like Red Bull downhill and everything. They're the coolest action brand on the planet. What are they doing sponsoring competition bouldering? And especially an unknown girl from Runcorn. So I thought, right, if the corporates come and play this game, I know these centres aren't very expensive and I know I don't know what I'm doing.
Win.
All right, so it's just so all of a sudden, my little passion project lifestyle business was under threat. So I'm like, sink or swim, grow now. So I went on the Goldman Sachs course, it took me a while to get onto that and just sort it out basically. So I thought, if I get in, I know how to put the business first and how to put the passion second. I'm also a massive nerd, right? So I'll learn everything that needs to be learned to do it better, but also know I'm quite happy to recruit people much smarter than me where I need them. So I thought, right, if somebody's going to try and get a harness on this tiger, if it comes into our little space, I thought maybe arrogantly that I've got a really good chance of being that person. Because I was also an outsider. Nobody knew who I was. Nobody gave me any favours at the beginning because I wasn't famous. I'd never climbed anything hard or dangerous. So there was no favours given to me when I started. And I'm like, okay, so I've got no old boys network, if you like, that I'm leaning on, that I need to protect. I just need to protect this. So I thought, so we were first up, and the investment partner that we had, the investment director in particular, a guy called Liam May, was a passionate mountain biker, so he understood action sports from the get-go, and he pushed me so hard, but he was brilliant. He was the best coach, if you like, I've ever had, so I had to try so hard because he was so clever and so good. And so now I think what's happening is the investors that are coming into the space, none of them have grown very quickly, and most of them are roughly following in the mold that we've created, which is a good thing, right? So there's a really strong emphasis in our industry on ethical products. There's a strong emphasis on community and so on and so forth. So being one of the most visible climbing businesses and banging the drum about trying to be decent, I think is help shaping the industry. And then that's what our consumers want. So then that's what the investors have to pay attention to.
It's definitely the one thing the hangar's done the best, I would say, is just that innovation. And just like you say, not being afraid to try something new, just seeing where it goes, because otherwise you stay stuck in the same place for 20 odd years and then wonder why your business hasn't got any better,
And you've got to take some of the arrows with that. So presumably the thing is no doubt some of your mates have taken the piss out of you for starting a podcast.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, naturally, right? So when we started the Women's Climbing Symposium, I was abused for doing that. I even got grief on an uninhabited island in Scotland from somebody who was like, why aren't I in your audience category or something? I'm pleased to say she ended up being a keynote speaker at one point. But at the beginning, I was told there's no need for this. This is, women don't need another support group. And it was basically, the whole thing was the best women in the country, coaching, right? There was no support group. It was just isn't climbing cool? Let's all get together as getting together as a group of women. There was, but it was not popular, although it sold out immediately. You know what I'm saying? So, so the innovation, I think the one thing that I'm free of is because I'm not in the kind of well-known climbing community, I was free to innovate because who was going to criticise me?
Yeah. You didn't have a big name attached to you, so they couldn't come after you or anything like that.
No big name. None of my big name mates who were going to be in the magazines because I didn't have any. We're going to say this is silly, or whatever. So I had a lot more liberty to innovate. And also, I'm not worried about being criticised or being embarrassed because that's just a limit on how much you can try and achieve in the end.
When you talk about investors, you were talking about how finding the right relationship was important more so than money and terms. What were the kind of factors that you used or the judging criteria for what a good investor was?
So some of the terms elements, how long until they want to sell the business to a new investor? So what that means to the business is the person that sat at your board table changes, right? That's basically it, and the terms might change as well. So do they understand the sector? Do you feel like some resonance with them? Who have they worked with in the past? So you can get some references from previous businesses that they've worked with. Terms, time, length, and money, and just that sense of, do they get the business? And that's quite important. If you've got to work really, really hard to explain the concept, you're going to carry on working really, really hard to explain the concept. So you want somebody who's like, I see what you're doing.
Yeah.
Because at that moment, okay, this is going to give me more room for experimentation. And that's what you need, because we were still massively early stage. And again, I was like, climbing is at the beginning of its growth curve, and this is a very authentic kind of business with a very strong culture and a very vocal community that's not all that interchange a lot of the time. And we've got to keep one foot in our history and our culture, and we've got to have one foot in the future. We've got to manage that, right? So that's going to be hard, right? So, and people who kind of go, okay, I can see what happened to snowboard, skate, surf and so on as they went big, so that's it. Anybody who thought it was trampolining, right? I had to answer a lot of questions. Why isn't this like trampolining? Because trampolining, it just went under basically when we were raising money. And again, that lets you know what investors know. From the outside, they just thought it was trampolining because it's a fun thing to do. And like nearly everyone that does it's an adult. And I'm like, oh, right. Because it's only kids really that go trampolining.
When you're leading the charge, so to speak, on taking the subculture of climbing into the new world and making sure that it can grow in that way, it must be you must get a lot of people judging you and kind of backseat driving. Is that frustrating?
It's frustrating, but for me, it's also a signal that you're doing the right thing. If you're not pissing somebody off to some extent, you're not actually changing anything. So, and I don't know how true this is, but I think I read it in Harvard Business Review. Again, like a really cool thing that you will probably never read. Unless you're struggling to sleep. Right, so Harvard Business Review is talking about how immigrants tend to overrepresent as entrepreneurs. Because if you're not in the culture, right, then you're not blinded by it. Right? Because if you are deep in climbing land, everything that happens in climbing land appears completely normal. It's how it should be, right? Whereas if should be, exactly. Whereas if you're an immigrant and if you don't feel English in England and you don't come from an all-white family and so on and so forth, there's a constant kind of dysphoria that comes, or there was for me anyway, I don't know if it is for anyone. So there's that constant sense of not quite fitting in the mold, despite obviously now I am peak patriarchy now, like that's my thing. But within that, so you've kind of got this constant sense of unease. And so you're always asking, the natural thing is, well, why? So when we started the hangar, the first thing is there was no such thing as a real climber. I hated that phrase. Because if you've ever been othered, if you like, and that's a popular thing, but if being othered is a very distinct experience. And to say what a real climber is, that absolutely requires that there are fake climbers, right? And that's just a way of saying we're better than them. We're more worthy than them. And I really took issue with that. So the first thing was, if you're leaving the ground for fun, you're in the same family. And after that, it essentially doesn't matter. And what Shauna does, for instance, is beautiful and fantastic. Is it more worthy than Louise, who used to be our cleaner? She was a mum of 3 and she cleaned because it got her free climbing, and she used the money she got paid for cleaning to pay the babysitter so she could come climbing. And so for me, Louise is as inspiring as Shauna, but in completely different ways. And if anybody was ever going to tell me that Louise wasn't a real climber, I would have taken them to town on that one. So for me, that was part of the drive. Climbing's got something really special to offer people, especially in a world that looks like it's keen on cannibalizing itself. So the idea that we'd start calling people real and not real, for me was a big no-no. So that was, inevitably, I was going to make people angry by doing that. And I just knew that was part of the cost.
Yeah. Well, that happens especially when you've had climbing that's had there's been such a niche thing, and they feel like they're going to be attacked by the new age of investors and big business and all this sort of stuff, and they feel like, no, it's our thing, we're not going to let it take it away. And it's but we're literally helping. We're helping you grow it and improve it and making sure that so many more people can access it, so many more people can access jobs through it and the rest of it, but they just love this whole idea of like,
hours.
Man, it's hours. You can't take that away, you know.
But that's power, control, status. And what I find, especially of late, especially as things have been like really hard since the pandemic and everything, right? So I've noticed quite a lot of criticism of investors, right? And bear in mind, I'm very critical of investors, right? So just like, let's put that out there. But if you look, pretty much all of our pro climbers in the UK, maybe Shauna to one side, they all come from money, right? And I'm not going to judge anybody on that, but no one was living in a cupboard for like 18 months or whatever, and you don't have to do that. But the idea that you would be criticizing investors because there's an external source of money coming in, I think quite a lot of the people that have started walls in and around the country have both come from money or have been given money with which to start it. They haven't sort of just generated all of that cash themselves. So I think there's a bit of just sort of baseline hypocrisy out there, and investors are just an easy hate figure because, to some extent, a lot of them deserve it and they do have a tendency to ruin industries, right? But they also benefit a lot of industries as well. So I think that's a little bit of a thing there. And again, it's just another othering, so it's just other people that present a little bit of a threat.
What's your future plans for the hangar? Are you going to keep growing it? Are you going to eventually try to exit? What's your kind of goal in terms of, like, say, 10 years' time? What do you think the hangar will be?
I'd like to be in the White House.
Like the White House? Okay.
Oh dear. Is there a bit of an American in you that we don't know about as well?
Comment below the odds of that happening.
Northern Irish, Jamaican, American, it's like, it's all over the shop,
listen,
isn't it?
I'm having a good go. Why not? I mean, in all honesty, I don't know, within 10 years, I would like to be in a non-executive position. So, and that's because in the end, all I really want to do is hang out with my family and friends and go climbing, right? I mean, my interests are pretty basic, right? And I can already afford to do them. So there's no like big kind of like exit plan where I'm suddenly gonna like get a bigger car. I mean, I'm just gonna crash it anyway. I'm never going to clean it. If you've seen my car out, it's like the mobile bin, right, thing. Basically, like, I'm never going to get a nice car because I'm just going to ruin it. It'd be insane. So I would love to find or cultivate the person that's going to take over. Right, that would give me a huge amount of satisfaction to find that the person to hand over the baton to. I think every city in the UK should have a hangar in it, as at least one. So that would be part of the goal. Would we go international? Again, I suppose that's what I would hope the next person would do. That's where global consolidation would start to come in, whether that would be buying other businesses or being bought by another business or something like that. Because then one of the things that bigger businesses can do is they can exert more control over the supply chain. Right, so if you're buying like £10 million worth of from a company that does 50 million turnover and you say, I want you to be more sustainable, are they going to lose the £10 million contract or are they going to learn to be more sustainable? So if you change your power relationship with your supply chain, you can have a really positive impact. So again, that's a key part of my journey.
So what's the size of the business now? What's the size of Climbing Hangar now?
So 9 sites, 250 employees, so probably not far off 10 million in turnover.
Yeah. And so you would be looking to get potentially either buy out smaller kind of local businesses, or you would be looking to get bought out. Who would be, like, globally, who would be the one that would potentially fit that bill, if there's anyone?
Well, if I think of the peers that I admire the most, on a European level, Arcos in France, stunning. I love what they do. Like, some of it's pretty wacky, but they're so beautiful and French and fantastic.
Yeah.
So, and then the Boulderwelt crew in Germany. Again, so Dave Cato, I've spoken to a few times and met him. I think his team are just so on it. I've just been to one of their latest ones in Karlsruhe, and it was so clean and modern, but still had, like, here's the magic wood area, here's the Zillertal area, like in the cafe with loads of beautiful imagery. I thought the choice of furniture was stunning, and the climbing was excellent, beautiful centres. So, and I just love it when people do a really good job, and if, to some extent, if you were merged rather than bought, which are different, so you tend to have a dominant partner, like in a merger. So if one of those companies became the dominant partner, you'd be okay with that, because they're bloody good. And if you've got, it's nice to have respect for a peer and to really closely follow somebody and enjoy their success too, because you're like, it's amazing. So, and then in the UK, we've got a couple of interesting operators. I think the depot are clearly still knocking out the best destination climbing centres. You know, they're big, they've got everything in. But then I think the TCA crowd, or the Climbing Academy, they've still got like genuine old school vibes, but like with a foot in the future as well. And their team are just like really, really decent human beings. And I like that as well. You know, when you just can imagine yourself working with people. So, because that's it. I love working with great people.
Hello there, champions. Hey, are you getting married soon? Or do you know somebody that's getting married soon? So outside of this podcast, I am a wedding videographer full-time, and Maven Visuals Wedding Films is my company and also the sponsors of today's podcast. So if you want that guy from that podcast to come and actually film your wedding for you, then all you have to do is visit www.mavenvisualsweddingfilms.com. And if you mention that you're a Two Beasts listener in the consultation, then you will get 10% off whatever package you choose. All right, see you then. Back to the podcast. All right. Let's have another fire half an hour.
We're back after the weemin, the admin, the wee admin.
We've all sorted ourselves out
so
now.
zen now.
Everyone's zen, wee's out.
The tension was growing as we all fought.
Everyone was talking really fast. Anyway, what else do you want to know? Yeah, quick.
Go. One of the things that, like, this is obviously the first time I've met you. Ollie's known you before. One of the things that I've heard about you before that I really admire, and now seeing it in person, I confirmed admiration, is your ability to have your foot in the corporate world, yet still not be dressed in a suit and be like this ridiculous, like, circle jerk type of character. Like, you're still you. You're still a casual person that you feel like you can have a real conversation with. I've seen some of the, like, Ollie's told me about some of the text conversations you've had.
Don't put them on the podcast.
No, I don't know. You don't know.
No, please.
No, but I don't know many CEOs.
The ones with Dan are even better, to be fair. They're good. But he's right. Like, your ability to be able to cross from that, like, you know, sitting in a boardroom and having to do all the stuff you do, to then like having a banter and a joke with you know, your employees and stuff is mega, man.
My big question is, and this is really important to me, how do you maintain that? Because I obviously want to grow businesses and be successful, but I also don't want to ever have to, you know, put on a suit and tie and look like a knobhead and pretend to be someone that I'm not. So how have you done that?
So my starting point might be slightly unusual, right? Which is, I would criticize the idea of like the authentic self to begin with, right? So because I think there's a problem inside the idea, right? Because it means that there is a real thing for you to be, right? And how would you know when you're there, right? Because who I am now feels very different from who I was even 5 years ago, right? So I have worn a suit. I will probably wear one again, right? If I wear one, it has to be a nice one, right?
Yeah.
So and that sort of thing. So like, I suppose if I'm going to try out a hard trad lead, right, I go into a different mind space from if I'm just punting around doing some nice easy sport climbing in the sun with some friends and we're just having a nice day, right? I don't see that there's a conflict between the two, right?
That's true. Yeah.
They're just a different mindset. So when I go into the boardroom is a particular arena, if you like, a particular performance. Is it not me? No, it's just Ged that's in the boardroom, if you like. And Ged in the boardroom has got nothing to do with Ged that's texting Ollie, right? So I think for the first instance, removing a sense of conflict for a start, as in this is how I'm supposed to be and I must always be the same person at the same time, right? So I think that's, I don't know, I just think that's unnecessarily restrictive, right?
Yeah.
So I think we're all multifaceted human beings. There are times when I'm in lead mode, and if I'm in a group of more than 4 people, I try not to participate in the decision making, right? Because it just takes too long to make a decision. And do I care if we go bowling or archery? Like, if that's what's on the cards today, like, I don't really care. As long as I'm with those people having fun, it'll be faster to make a decision if there's 4 voices instead of 5.
That's true. I guess the closest thing I can relate to with that is like when I speak to like someone elderly. Like, it's completely different to how I would speak to Ollie. They're both still me though. Yeah. Like, I'm still speaking to them through a genuine tone.
Or at a funeral or at a wedding, right?
Exactly,
you wouldn't go and wear, unless the dress code for the funeral was bright colours only, we would tend to dress in black, right? I mean, it's a cultural thing. And I just don't, I think sometimes the way the authentic self idea comes through is that I will be one person, this immovable, unchangeable object, and I think that's insane, because I don't think anyone behaves like that. I don't think we want to behave like that. And also, I sometimes genuinely think it's disrespectful. You know, like, if I go to the corporate world right, into their offices, that's their space, right? So I kind of go with the flow. I don't need to come in and be whatever, like, you know, and at the same time, when they come to me, they all tend to dress down.
Yeah.
You know, I just think it's okay. And it's one of those things, I just don't think we should worry about it too much. You go into a space, as long as your values are intact. If your values are what you have to dress in, I mean, for me, that's not a thing, you know, but if that is, then I suppose that's a thing for you. But like, as long as you stay with your values, I think you're being as authentic as you can. And your values are, like, so I think the hardest thing as a leader is when you have to make a decision and you know that one of your values is getting compromised because there isn't a right answer, there's just a less bad answer.
Yeah.
Right? And those are hard times. Those are the hardest things in a leadership role, is kind of going, well, left someone loses and right someone loses. Can I make peace with myself at the kind of loss to the kind of person? And I think that's, with success comes more and more like really deep introspection onto your values and working with less bad decisions rather than just good decisions.
Yeah, and it seems like also you have to kind of accept that, like you say, sometimes there's no good option, there's just two bad options.
Yep.
And living with yourself and forgiving yourself of whatever decision you went with, even if it turns out it was actually the wrong decision and it made things even worse than if you had picked the other one, just accepting that is part of the human experience and that things aren't always going to be the right decision.
Yep.
And living with the consequences and realizing that it doesn't actually take away from your heroism as an individual and it doesn't detract from the things that you have done. I think it's important. Do you ever find that say one group or another, let's take the corporate for example. Do you ever find that even though that you're respectful to the corporate world and that you're willing to dress in a suit and be that person, do you find that if they see your casual behavior that ever detracts from your message? Do you ever struggle with that or not really? I
guess there's probably certain behaviors I just wouldn't exhibit anywhere near that space in the first place. And again, I think, say, if I was going to be critical of the corporate space, right, it's a highly performative world, right? There is an idea of what sort of professionalism looks like, what certain language is acceptable and so on, right? Whereas I would take the view, if I look at the things that the corporate have done to the world, like in terms of who's lost their job, why certain corporate behaviors, I actually think that their idea of professionalism is sometimes quite far off the mark in terms of like having a moral compass component to it for a start. So, but in the end, when I'm in that space, I'm there for me and my company. So when I'm there, my choices, my behaviours need to reflect the best interests of everybody who works at the Climbing Hangar and the future interests of the Climbing Hangar, and that's all that counts.
Yes.
So that naturally senses a whole bunch of stuff, because let's say, for instance, like, do any of them ever need to know that I've been to Lakota, for instance? And if they went to Lakota in Bristol, right, you know, which is an insane drum and bass club a lot of the time, like it's pretty bananas, you know, like what judgments would they make? And in the end, if they could go, all right, so he's been to Lakota a few times, but actually he's running one of the most successful climbing businesses in Europe. Does Lakota matter? No. Right. But some people don't make that decision. Some people kind of go, this is a problem. They don't know why, it just cuts across their sensibilities. So I shouldn't give them that opportunity to have that bit of doubt, because it's just their illogical prejudices. And, you know, why would you open up yourself to that degree of risk?
I guess it also comes down to what you were saying earlier about the purpose.
Yeah.
Like if you go in there with the thing of what you've just said, which is, I'm here with the Climbing Hangar, this is my thing. And it's kind of, it takes that personal aspect away. You're not there for you, you're there for your company, you're there for the people that work for you. That probably makes it a bit easier to then put those points across a lot better, I guess. Yeah. In a way that makes sense in that arena rather than in another arena where you're, I don't know, if you're at a conference talking to a bunch of other climbers or you're talking to a bunch of GMs or something, then you know how to talk in. It's still you, like you say, it's still you. It's just respecting whichever arena you're in, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's the goal. And then it's about outcomes, really. And I suppose my focus is on what are the outcomes. And I suppose that's where my identity lies. Am I getting the outcomes that I wanted to? Am I using the right methods to get the outcomes? If you like, and it's that sort of like more dynamic relationship rather than, I have not really spent any time imagining like who am I to some extent. Like it just feels like it's an ongoing experiment of learning and experimentation, which I really enjoy, which is also quite destabilizing because there's not like any like core. if you like. And I have like regular crises where I'm like, oh fuck, like I'm doing too much work, I just want to go climbing more, etc., etc. But then I'm like, okay, but I also have a job that's the most like intellectually demanding and creative thing that I've ever done. Like, I mean, if you look at like the shit that's supposed to make for a great job, like I have all of them like 10 out of 10, and I'm like, okay, it just so happens that it's outrageously demanding, but then so's being as good as you possibly can at anything. Like, it's not easy trying your best.
Yeah, and also like not being good at stuff is pretty demanding as well, but just in a way that it kind of sneaks up on you and just destroys your life in that way. Yeah. Because if you're not useful to anyone, then you know what have you got? You just end up with no money, no job, suffering, struggling,
and they have to try and get out of it.
So it's like it's pick your poison.
Yeah.
There's no good choice. It's just
two
bad choices.
I actually like mine. Just every now and again, it does my head in. I'm a bit like, oh my God, I just go need to like meditate for an hour. Yeah. Like the missus and I had a weekend off without the daughter for the first time in March. And the first thing I did was sit in front of a tree and meditate for half an hour. Yeah. I'm like, oh man, nothing to do for 30 minutes. And I did my best not to move a single muscle. It was amazing.
It is great. I dabble with it occasionally. It's one of them things where you only do it when you're actually feeling stressed out, don't you? You should be training it all the time, like any other thing.
Yeah.
But that was one of the things I was going to ask you, actually, because you've got a lot of responsibility on your plate, and there's a lot of things I imagine that you just physically have to get done, otherwise things fall apart to a certain degree. I know you've got a great staff network. Like you say, you left for 6 months and only got one email and things kind of ran themselves. So it's obvious that you've built a company that's strong enough to kind of hold its own weight to a certain degree. But what happens if you wake up one morning and you just can't be asked? Like, what's your process?
Well, I suppose that happens all the time. So especially when you've got bad decisions to make. Right, or decisions that will be unpopular. Right, those are like getting out of bed on those days is horrendous.
You just like want to pull the covers over and just sort of be like, no.
Yeah, you just want to just curl up and just kind of hope everything goes away. But I suppose in the end, I think it's got a lot of similarity with training. Right, there's not an elite athlete in the world who loves every second of training. It's like, I want to go and see if I can make myself vomit again today. I mean, I think, but that's it. Like, passion isn't this like, it isn't a journey of joy. I think it's a journey of complexity. Like, it's an adventure, right? And there's bits that are up and down, and there's bits where you're hating it and loving it, and everything in between. So I think it's that full kaleidoscope of experience. So on those days, I just feel, well, this is the day where I actually earn my money. Right, this is the day where I get up, put on my big boy pants and go, right then, so what are we going to do? This is hard. How do I make this decision? And I go, right, well, so how do I start? So I'll gamify starting. I'll go, how fast can you start? Because obviously the last thing you want to do is start, right? So how fast can you start? And I'm highly competitive, so we're like, all right, how about now? Right. Okay, number one, how have I fucked up these sorts of decisions before? Right, list all of your mistakes. Right, what mistakes do you normally make when you're under pressure? These are the mistakes I normally make. So now I've outlined my risks, and then I start to work through what am I trying to achieve. Let's say this problem is finished, like we've sorted it out. What's happening in the world, right? Paint that picture, right? And now I've got a bridge between now and there. So, and then you've got to get into your process.
That's a great process, actually, how you write out your weaknesses. Like, you highlight them there, so they're like bang, right in front of you. Like, okay, how do I not make those mistakes again? Like, what have I learned from them in the past that I'm not going to make them again? That's really interesting, actually.
Yeah,
it's a great way of doing it, for sure.
I've got such an extensive back catalogue of mistakes. Yeah. It's taking like 6 hours.
It'll take you a while to write down.
I should just have a document. So.
I'll get you one. I'll get one made up. It's just a poster.
I'm sure Dan will have a decent list.
It'll be the size of this entire wall.
What's the harshest lesson you had to learn? Was it the $100,000 contract thing, or was there a worse one?
We mismanaged a software relationship that we then had to exit from the contract, and I think it cost us $150,000 to exit the contract with egg all over our face. And like, I don't know, I can't remember how many tens of thousands of pounds in legal fees. It was a horror show.
Man, so you had to pay fat peas and you took a hit, like, emotionally or like reputationally.
Yep. Yeah.
Man.
Yeah.
It doesn't get much worse than that in the business world, does it, in some regard?
Yeah, I mean, feeling like you've completely ballsed up something that you thought was going to be like the big change maker, and then, like, I think it was $150,000 to get out of the contract. Because we're not working with you, we don't trust you anymore. But we signed the contract, and the terms of the contract weren't tight enough, because basically the other party had ballsed up.
Yeah.
Right? And they ballsed up fairly bad, but they hadn't ballsed up bad enough to fit the terms of the contract where we could exit and terminate the contract without consequence.
So like just before that point. Oh,
yeah.
mate.
But then, so this is one of those less bad decisions, right? Do we carry on with this partner that we don't trust, that's let us down at every single step of the journey? Or do we go to mediation with the lawyers, right? Or go to court, right? And either way, we're spending 6 figures, right? So which one... Like,
it's that lesser of two evils,
yeah,
right?
so then you've got to put yourself at 3 years in the future, right? Yeah. And what's the better future 3 years from now? Because you can't deal with the immediate problem right in front of your face. You've got to make the decision for quite far in the future, and that's what you're building towards. And yeah, I mean, that was grim.
That's an interesting point. So in the times when you know that every decision is going to suck, you actually try and fast forward. Just imagine like you said 3 years, could be 5 years, 10 years, whatever. Imagine 3 years from now, what is each scenario going to look like? And then you pick based on that and suffer the short-term consequences regardless.
Yeah, pretty much. Because like say, for instance, at the beginning of COVID, so before the government announced furlough, right, obviously everyone was in panic, right? And we made the decision, we're like, right, let's just pay everyone full for 6 weeks. Because as a management team, we needed time to think, right? But the most screaming priority was everybody in the team was like, am I going to get paid? Right, so we're like, okay, cool, everyone's going to get paid. So all of a sudden, everybody in the staff teams, all of their concerns at that point in time, we now had a temporary 6-week breathing space. Now the executive team could get back to kind of go, what are we going to do? So, and that was because that basically just filled the horizon. And as soon as that was gone, we could concentrate. So it had a cost. Was it the right cost? Should we have went 4 weeks, 2 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, right? So, whatever, right? But in this end, what we needed was time to think. So we gave ourselves time to think, but also we gave ourselves control. Whereas in that software scenario, we could stick with what we had and pay the bill, right? The 150 grand exit fee, right? But we had control. So if you like, there was so much certainty in this space, but that certainty was going to cost 150 grand. We could not pay the bill and carry on working with these people. And how much would it cost us to carry on work? How many more fuck-ups was there going to be? How many more headaches? How much of my time and everybody else's time in the executive team was going to be hoovered up by this relationship? And we didn't know that. So that might have been a 300 grand bill. They might have sorted it out and it might have been fine, but we didn't know. So all that uncertainty made it feel that we'll just choose certainty and pay the bill.
You can only go with what you know in terms of like the evidence you've got right in front of your face, right?
Yeah,
like you don't want to jump into that and go, it might be all right. Whereas you're like, that's going to be fine. We know that for a fact, so let's just do that. And
you've let us down consistently. Yeah. Why should we believe that you won't?
Yeah.
And then you kind of go, right, well, we'll just go where we can control the scenario.
You mentioned earlier, like you'd like to maybe in the future, like coach smaller businesses and help them get into kind of, grow, I suppose, in the same way that you did. Is there another business you would enter? Is it that one, or is there other businesses you would like to experiment with in the future? Or?
I mean, I love basically customer facing. If you're, so like whether it's, climbing, food, anything like that, whether you're engaging with people in a face-to-face way. Like I'm not much of a digital person at all, so anything that's face-to-face, I get really excited for. Like making stuff for people, and I love it. Any business that's making people's lives happier. So I'm coaching the CEO of a adventure sailing business at the moment. And it's amazing. I hope I've made some difference to his business plan. He seems pretty psyched about it. So about the changes. And it's nice making a difference. Like it's just so beautiful. It's kind of sharing your thoughts and someone go, oh my God, you've really cleared that up for me. And you're like, it's brilliant. And he's doing good stuff, He's making people happier, taking them around the world in a zero carbon way, doing like really cool stuff.
And I guess sometimes it's just about telling people stuff that they already knew to a certain degree. It's just having that sounding board, isn't it?
Like coming at it from a slightly different angle that they might not have thought about, and then they're like, oh yeah, man, that actually works.
Or just putting their thoughts in an order, which you can do because you're not emotionally involved in the process. Like it's not hurting you. So you can go, well, it looks to me like if you just did the same things but this way around, you'd be grand.
Kind of in the same way that when you know you're friends with a woman that's not good for him, you can be like, hey, you need to get out of that, buddy. And it's easy for you to say, and it's harder for them to do. And then when you're in that situation, it's hard for you to do. And vice versa.
That's it. You're blinded. When something means a lot to you and it's right up here, you can't see anything, can you?
Blind by emotion, essentially. Yeah.
But working with like cool people that I've got like that thing about them, it's just ace, isn't it? And if you can help, that's something that's really cool.
So what is it like? So in terms of being a CEO, I feel like people have this perception of like, oh man, CEO, he's like big money bucks, drives around a nice car, has a nice house, but
multiple jets.
yeah, multiple jets. You got a yacht apparently. I've heard rumours you have a yacht.
Yeah,
so
I
there's
think
that
I
one.
had two.
I mean, something like that. I don't know. You're in Italy on your yacht or something. Anyway, but you know, so people have this opinion of what a CEO is, but we're sat in your house right now. It's just a normal home that any normal person would have. So what is it actually like being on a day-to-day basis of a CEO and sort of dispelling maybe some of those rumours, saying that you don't have two yachts, you actually have four?
I don't have two yachts.
No.
So, well, I suppose on the street that I live in, so I mean, 50% of the street is social housing. Steve Salisbury, who's a duty manager, lives
down the road.
A few doors down the road. And Richie who's a duty manager, lives in the house behind me.
Nice.
So now, obviously, a lot of that is a consequence of that initial mistake, right, which put me in debt for 10 years or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Right, so I would have a lot more money if that hadn't happened, right? So I really should have made that £750 document. Anyway, right.
Anyway, moving on.
Anyway, but in the end, I suppose what my wife Steph and I, our aspirations materially are relatively modest, right? So what we did, our house before here in Newcastle was in a neighbourhood called the Murder Well, right? So that was its local nickname. Meadow Well was its real name. So, but I guess we're just quite chill using whatever resources we've got to do whatever. So we could have bought a nicer house than this one, could have afforded to do so. But we're like, do you want to live in a nicer house and not be able to afford to go on climbing holidays? No. All right, buy a house that's exceptionally cheap. And that was the choice. And also, I knew then that would allow me to take out either some more loans or whatever to keep, funding some of the business stuff. So in essence, the house is a nice house. Our neighbours are lovely. We have had drug dealers smash in our other neighbours' front doors. Pay your drug dealer, right? I mean, that's the game.
Don't piss him off. It's obvious.
Business advice from a CEO.
I mean, just based on our neighbours' experience, I mean, they're often people with a certain penchant for violence. So if you take the drugs from them, give them the money.
Anyway. I don't even know what that word means.
But you get the general gist. So, they're just not the right sort of people to annoy. But anyway, so our streets are very colourful. One of our other neighbours, I think somebody in the house had an affair, and the wife of the person I had an affair with came and poured petrol all over their car and set fire to it and blew the car up. So the road is still scorched black down. So there's quite a lot of good fun.
I can see why Dan doesn't.
It's good. In amongst it.
I can see why Dan goes, I'm all right, I'll stay down in Luton. I don't care how cheap your house is.
Exactly. So all that to one side, Steph and I just made a decision. We're like, okay, what's important to us? Like being able to go on holiday, and for me, being able to carry on investing in the business. And we're like, this house is nice. It's nice enough. Like, it doesn't matter. And fortunately, we don't have massive sort of like ambitions, like status-wise or like things. So we are trying to move house now because we've got a little one, so we'd like a garden. So we're going to go and move somewhere and it's got a garden.
To be fair, it sounds like the scaffolding out there's just collapsed as well, so it's a good time to get out.
Hey, thankfully not on our car.
On your car, so we're going to drive home. That'll be fun.
So I think interestingly, of all of the things like being a CEO has done to me, is it's changed my view of leadership significantly. So as I said, I've always been fairly political. The sort of family I come from, you'd naturally be quite political. And it's easy to be critical, right? Whereas actually, in essence, leading is really, really hard. And when anybody makes it into management in the hangar, like the talk is, welcome to having to make tough decisions, and I think that's the defining thing, because everyone's like, this is shit, this could be better. Whereas then the choice is, well, is it going to be better enough? Is it worth the energy? Of all of the things we could be doing, is that the top thing that we should be doing? So then you have to get into this like matrix of how decisions are made, how priorities are made. And the thing is then what you recognize is there's always losing going on. There's always things that are not being done, right? So, and what's his chops? Elon Musk, right? So he takes over Twitter. It's not like he's short on money, right? And it looks like he's destroying that, what was destroying a successful business. So an almost infinite amount of resources is not the answer, clearly. Having the right perspective, a degree of humility, whatever it is, having the right way of making decisions, and so on. So I guess whereas I probably would have been fairly hard left my whole life, I'm critical of power, still critical of power, but at least I've got some sympathy now with actually how difficult it is to get anything done. And sometimes even, do you remember doing like the magic moves, which is a hangar thing, like creating a new circuit? We got everyone together, everyone agreed on what it was. There was no disagreement whatsoever. Some 9 months later, it's still not consistently implemented.
No.
We've only got 8 facilities. you know, like, and everyone thought it was a good idea and agreed on basically everything.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and like that for me was the most amazing teacher. I'm like, getting stuff done is hard. Like, ideas are cheap. Getting outputs in the world, especially if you need somebody else to do it, that is incredibly difficult.
And especially across multiple sites, like the Hangar has. Like, it's all right. I think a lot of people get confused and they're like, oh, but, you know, they're doing this. And it's like, it's because they've only got one. That's all they have to worry about, is that one individual climbing ball. Is we've got nearly 9. And you're like, that there's a considerable difference there in terms of you know, how stuff's implemented, how well the communication has to be like on point, because otherwise stuff gets lost. And there's more people that have more agendas, and like, you know, they have their own opinions, and it's just all like so much harder. And it's weird that people can't just see the fact that there's a difference between one site and
but
a
then,
lot of others, you know. So,
but I think that's part of the human condition, is like we just don't see the complexity in other people's world. We see it in our own, but we don't see it in others. Whereas I think as soon as you're in the leadership role, like, complexity is forced upon you on a moment by moment basis, and then resolving that complexity is hard. So then I think really, prior to doing like the CEO bit, like even when it was just one hangar, right, because it was easy, right, because you're there, you can make the decisions on the hoof, whereas now you have to make decisions that everyone's got to follow, right? So the moral compass, the value set that you have, I used to think values are dead wanky, some corporate bollocks, whereas now you kind of like, oh, right, well, we actually need it. It's a framework. It's a framework that everyone understands. And if we're not doing that, anybody in the company can say, well, that's not really in line. And I've had that, you know, like, and I've been called out on stuff, which is useful, right? That's what you want. So moving into that space where you have like this value scaffold in order to guide what you're doing, so it's consistent. Now that's really tricky, you know. But I mean, I guess I like complexity, so it's good fun. But it's like being like, I'm the man now, like, I suppose, which is quite weird, you know. Like, as soon as I had yachts and villas and stuff.
That's awesome, yeah.
And
man.
Congratulations on the helicopter, by the way.
Well, that's what
We just see it as we drove down, actually.
It's just easier to get around, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you got a heli.
See, traffic jams. Sometimes it takes nearly 4 minutes to cycle to Matchworks. So in the helicopter, I can do it in 3.
Traffic jams are famously for peasants.
Yeah. Surf cycle them.
I'm conscious of the time. It's 11:25 and we have you till 11:30. But I just want to say that the stuff you're talking about coaching, you've definitely helped me with a bunch of stuff. I think it's really interesting to chat to somebody who's made it, who's, you know, building this thing. I love the fact that you're community focused. I think that's a strong thing. I think that's going to be a bond that if it can go well, if it can be done right, will get people a lot further. And I guess the last thing that I just wanted to touch on is anything that you wanted to touch on, any kind of, like we said at the start, before we start recording, anyone watched this far is probably going to be pretty interested in what you had to say. So I suppose, is there any kind of message or thing you would like to push here on this podcast?
Okay, well, I tell you what, something that was on my mind over the weekend was about collaboration, which is probably sort of teed up in my head by talking about what is it that defines like this leadership CEO thing. And it seems that we're very, very quick to find fault in other people, right? Whereas I think cynicism is toxic. And like, you know, we've encountered some of it at work. It's natural, right? Whereas cynicism, I think, is intellectually lazy, right? Like, it's always like this, they're always like that, things will never change. Well, that is absolutely guaranteeing that things will stay exactly the same. And also, cynicism is a gift to shit leaders. Because now I know you don't expect change to happen, so why would I try? You're going to hate me anyway, so why would I try and do anything good? Criticism is welcome and exciting, right? It's even more welcome and exciting from people who can criticize themselves and then get into the complexity of doing things. So, and I suppose that's it. Like, I look at what we've built at the hangar, like as a team, as respective communities, and each hangar is very different. You know, like Hangar Plymouth is very Plymouth, which is good. It's not like Liverpool hangars, right? Because Devon's different, Plymouth is different. So what you really want to do is you want to build and reflect on that local community. So in that essence, like that collaborative way of like, how do we make change and tolerate the effort it takes to make change? Like, nothing changes in less than 6 months. You know, and 6 months is fast. And I think if people adjusted or recalibrated expectations, I think we'd make a better world a lot faster. And I think we'd all be a lot happier. Because you know, when, what's his name, Hooker Tyvel did Burden of Dreams, right? Like 5 seasons in, how the hell did he carry on motivating? Whereas we've got people that sometimes by week 2, they're like, well, this is crap. It's a car crash, isn't it? you know.
Yeah, meanwhile, Gnarly's there for like whatever it was, 4 years, 5 years on one problem, basically. He spent like 4 or 5 years on one problem.
That's something I've been thinking on recently, like with when there's a war of ideas, whether it's on a small scale in a business or on a larger global scale, like there's a lot of that going on at the minute, you know, these so-called culture wars.
Yeah.
And I've got my own positions on it. We've all got our own positions on it. The way I'm starting to think now is like, there has to be something that comes after. Like Russia and Ukraine, there's a war, but we can't just like wipe out an entire one of them. Like there's got to be some sort of peace at some point. So you can't just go through blindly hating stuff. And in the same way, like culturally, people that are extremely left-wing and people that are extremely right-wing, at some point, they are going to have to come together. There's no negotiation. We can't just keep in this perpetual war. So like, from a business perspective, I suppose it's a good way to wrap it up and just say like, when you have a disagreement, I'm trying to focus more now on what comes after that. Like, how do we find that common ground and empathy rather than sympathy? But like you say, understanding the nuance of why someone's feeling that way, even if it is misguided, even if it's wrong, there's probably a good reason.
I think that empathy thing, like if you change the internal environment, so I hold a view, you hold a view, I can want to be right and I can want to demonstrate to you why I'm right, or you and I can both go on the journey and see if we can discover a greater truth. And like, that sounds a bit grand, but as in, we can just move closer towards truth, if you know what I mean. So like, whereas if I'm trying to prove that I'm right to you, actually, we don't find out anything, do we?
No,
right?
That's true.
I reinforce my position and you reinforce yours.
Yeah. I was listening, boys. I just had to restart the cameras there, boys.
We're back, it's fine.
Yeah, well, hey, to be fair, restarted the cameras, and I think that's a wrap. But thank you very much for your time and for inviting us to the house. I really appreciate it.
Nice. Thanks very much. That was good fun.
Let's another episode in.
Cracking interview.